imagine you didn't know me and imagine you knew nothing about Hylo, and I'm like, I'm going to come in and we're going to build a sports brand and it's going to be bigger than Nike. You'd be like, yeah, cool, man. But like, that's what you do at the beginning. You're literally like, hey, I've got this idea and we're going to be a sports brand that's going to like revolutionize sport.
Mike, I am very, very excited for this. Thank you so much for joining Business of Sport.
Thank you for having me. Excited to catch up, guys.
You know what, Jay? You rock and roll with the first question.
Oh, love it. Well, firstly, I think before we get into it, it'd be great to just understand some of the cliff notes. So baseline experiences, where you are at the moment, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, so I retired in September 2020 to continue exploring my business, Hylo Athletics, which is a sportswear brand. We make shoes from environmentally friendly materials, and I had a 10-year career in football. A lot of ups, a lot of downs, and yeah, feeling the same in business, to be honest, now.
I think that's a great place for us to start. What was it like being involved in that football environment as a young man, coming through academies and the youth football system? How did you handle the pressure and the expectation at such a young age, both, I guess, internal and external?
I think you don't know any different as a kid. I think a lot of the time footballers can reflect on it and be like, it was really intense. But for me, I don't have those same memories. I felt like I was just playing football.
Did you always know you wanted to be a footballer? Was there a time when it got serious? I
always knew that football was a key passion of mine.
Yeah.
And I don't think I really had the belief that I was going to be a professional footballer, truth be told. It felt like an obsession, like an obsessive passion. And I managed to get into the system through Chelsea Academy when I was very young, at the age of 8, and kind of then went to QPR. And even when I was in the youth team at QPR, I was not a starter in my first season in the youth team. And usually that's not a good sign if you're 17 and you can't even start in the youth team.
Yeah.
So it felt like I was deeply passionate about this one thing. I was clearly capable of it, but I was in this probably low probability of making it professional. And then in my second year of the youth team, I had an incredible season and was like scoring every week, multiple goals in the youth team. And then just out of nowhere, seemed to form this belief that I would do it.
Starting from, I mean, you say 8 years old in at Chelsea. How does that even come about? Do you go to a set of trials and people have a look at you at that age? I mean, how does it work?
So I was playing for a Sunday league team and scoring a lot of goals. I think as most 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
You know, you're a striker. Everyone's a striker when they're 7, and I just scored like 10 goals a game. And my coach, goalkeeper.
He was scoring 10.
Apart from you.
He was a cute keeper.
Yeah. So I was scoring loads of goals, and the coach of my team had a friend who was a Chelsea scout. And he said, come and watch this kid play. And at the end of one game, they sort of called me and my parents over and said, we'd love to invite you for a training session at Cobham as part of the Chelsea Academy. So I went over and did it, and pretty much they signed me within a couple of weeks. And you go then into more of a formal process where twice a week you go to we went to Cobham, the training ground, and did training sessions, and then you'd play at a weekend. And I managed to hang on at Chelsea until 13, when the Abramovich era truly started and the money really started to pump in. And the narrative of football at that time was all about physicality. So this was sort of just pre kind of Spain, when they, I think it was when they won the Euros and then the World Cup, or they had this team of like Xavi and Iniesta, which transformed football. But prior to that, it was all about athleticism. And anybody who watched me play would know that was not a key quality of mine. Even more so as a 12-year-old. So I was let go on the premise that I was not physical enough, and then left and went on trial to QPR for like 3 years. They didn't sign me on the same premise.
Can I just ask, when you're let go at 12, that's quite a emotional upheaval to go through at 12. How do you respond to that?
I remember crying a lot and feeling pretty sad about it. And then this opportunity presenting itself at QPR, which I still even don't know the story about how that came about. And I think you wrap up a lot of your identity in the sport, and that gets worse as you get older. And that leads to a lot of the issues that I think are sort of documented in the game now. I learned in that sort of episode a little bit about what football is about, and how to sort of come back a little bit from adversity, I guess.
And when you get let go, is there then a process where you go around other clubs looking for a new home, I guess? Is it something where another club may have been watching you and therefore goes straight away, actually, we'd really like you to come on our books? How does it work?
Yeah, so geography is a big factor, or it was when I was playing. So you can only be within like a 90-minute radius of the club that you're training or playing at. So you're limited by that variable. So for me, if I had not been at Chelsea, that was Cat A sort of academy. There was these things called Centre of Excellences, which were sort of the likes of QPR, I think Charlton at the time. Oh no, Charlton was an academy, but there were these various clubs that were probably a tier down, and that reflected really their finances. And QPR, I think, was sort of, a lot of these clubs at the second level was kind of offering trial days to players who had been released from like an Arsenal or a Chelsea. And it was geographically close enough to school and all of the other things that I was doing in order to go and train. And I trained there for like 2.5 years. So they kept on saying, come back for training. I used to play the odd game, come back for training. And I was like, it was like an odd relationship where you sort of wanted it to be more sort of permanent and formal, but I was just sort of turning up and training. And I think a lot of that was down to my physicality, which was always my weak spot as a pro. But at that age, I was just nowhere near as physically developed, which is bizarre when you think you're like 14, 15,
Yeah.
and who is physically developed at that age?
Him. He was enormous.
You were, yeah, true.
I think you mentioned school, and it's fair to say you had a different background maybe to a lot of the people that you were in these academies with. Can you give us an idea of what that was like, and if that ever played a part in how you felt within the setup?
Yes, I've always felt that I've had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because of that feeling of not really belonging. In a kind of a good way. I've learned to embrace it quite a lot. Where in football, I was kind of the posh boy who went to Harrow and publicly school educated, and at sort of Harrow, I was sort of it was bizarre to say, but the chav who played football basically, because you know at this posh school and football seemed as a lesser sport. So I was always sort of kind of wearing that badge of honour, and I think grappled with it in different ways throughout my career. But certainly in the latter half, embraced who I was, and that sort of had a positive effect on me.
I'm fascinated. You said there about kind of the identity element. When you're so young, do you kind of consider yourself a footballer then? And when does it actually become a contract? I'm just intrigued when it goes from like turning up to like, actually, Mike Doughty signed this contract.
It is bizarre, by the way. I fully acknowledge that. I think
we were so young as well. It's like buying.
I think the hard part of being like young is you're not the most confident all the time, or you're going through a lot as a young person, right? But a lot of your friends attach your worth and identity as a footballer. So you've sort of in your peer group, you're this footballer who's playing for Chelsea or QPR, and then if that is stripped away from you, then what is your sort of worth within that equation? So that's I guess point one. And then in terms of contractual stuff, at 16 it gets quite formal. So in the under 16s, you go through sort of essentially a final year of preparation, and then they'll offer you a thing called a YTS, which is a youth team scholarship. That terminology might have evolved, but that's when I was playing. And then they give you a full-time contract where you leave school and you do like a couple of like BTECs, which are sort of basic qualifications alongside playing football full-time. So you go into the training ground with the senior boys, the professional team, and you're essentially on a slipstream to trying to be a professional. I think the economics of it were like, you get like 80 quid a week or something, or 100 quid a week.
That was your first paycheck?
Well, I didn't leave at that point. Yeah. So I was relatively academic and obviously went to a good school. And when I got offered, it was never clear that I was going to get offered a contract. And then one game, I just had a great game in front of the under-18s manager. And he pretty much at the end of the game pulled me to one side and said, "We'd love you to come on full-time." And I went home and obviously, had a row with my dad, who was, adamant that I wasn't going to quit school and go sort of semi full time as this 80 quid a week footballer.
Was there no opportunity to stay in school when you demonstrated maybe a particular skill or kind of academic status within the football setup?
Certainly not the school I was at, because obviously it was private school and quite expensive. I think the one thing I'll say is when it became clearer week on week that I was actually a really good player, the club, and I think regardless of my skills, were very responsive to this idea of me making both work, and the school were as well. So I was lucky in the sense that had sort of relatively open-minded school who were like, yeah, I think we can make this work, and parents who were pretty belligerent and said you have to make it work, and then also a club that were open to the arrangement too. So I ended up going into this, taking this contract on, but also staying at school and sort of essentially doing my A-levels, where I would train 3 days a week. I mean, go to lessons in the morning, then go, drive over to the training ground, train in the afternoon, play a game on a Saturday, miss Saturday school, and then just try and catch up on my work from people in my classes and get by.
Do you think there's a way that this could work, or do you think there's something that system doesn't actually allow and take into? And it's something we'll work on kind of as we go through this conversation, but to provide more support for people within that system who have to then make quite huge decisions on football relatively early and at the cost of an academic career. If that doesn't work out for them, does that leave them at a big disadvantage? And can we do more within a footballing setup to change that?
So I'll give you my personal experience. I was still a professional at 24, being paid. I was the only one of that youth team that was still being paid, pretty much, apart from one other,
Wow.
who were actually then, essentially, were in a professional environment from the age of 16. There were two of us still earning a living from football at 24.
And the rest were dropped?
Well, they've fallen out of the game, yeah. Because you can a lot, like, well, not a lot. There's if you think about the probabilities as you go down, the probability of you getting to this YTS, this youth team scholarship, is pretty low. And then to transition from that YTS environment into the first team, or into any first team, let alone the first team of the club that you're at. So if I'm at QPR, which I was, the likelihood of me playing for QPR is really low. But then the likelihood of me playing for any club's first team is really low. So some people do make it into that first team environment in some capacity. But then even if you make it into that environment under those two potential opportunities, the likelihood of you staying in that environment by the age of 24 is even lower. So I think somebody said it's like a 1 in 10,000 shot of you still making a career from YTS level till the age of 24. 1 in 10,000. So if in business or in any sort of other environment, you'd be like, that's a pretty shitty bet. I'm not going to take those. I'm not
That's called venture capital. That's my business.
It's a moonshot, right?
Yeah, that is literally venture. Yeah. I mean, hopefully we have better odds than that. Yeah. But I totally get you.
But to answer your question then, do I think that more should be done? Of course, because if your identity is wrapped up in it, you've obviously got the mental health side of it. If financially there's no real career path there has to be other levers that are used to help people.
Yeah. Or I guess just make the education piece for those final 2 years more accessible within the demands of football.
Or learn a trade on the side,
exactly.
Something that you can fall back on.
Can I ask a tough question? You're a father now.
Yeah.
Your son or daughter comes to you and says, I want to be a footballer. What do you say to them? Having seen how difficult it is.
It's a hard question, this. Because I want to say no, but I think now, having been through that cycle and then doing what I do now, I do think the single biggest factor in anything is passion. And if my child is passionate about that, they will find a way, I think, to have a better life irrespective of the chances by following the passion, because I know what passion has done to me.
Yeah. We've I heard quite a lot, I think, over the last few years of some sports people talking about the feelings that they experience, and quite often the brevity of those feelings when what they achieve or have been striving to achieve for so long actually comes true. For you, working your whole kind of youth career, I guess, to become a professional footballer, you then make your Premier League debut. How did you feel when that moment actually happened? And did you digest it properly? Did you realise what you had actually achieved? And then moving forward, what was the next motivation for you?
I think a symptom of being an athlete or having had that grounding is you don't reflect very well. So I don't remember a point in time of feeling happy. I felt like I belonged there, in short, and I still do to a certain degree, because I'm a delusional, sports person who, I think confidence and sort of ego to a certain degree is like the difference between, somebody who can have a career in professional sport and somebody who doesn't, because we're all the kind of the protagonists in our own bullshit story, basically, and I recognise that in myself. I do remember a point when we played Villa Park at Villa Park against Aston Villa, and it was a Tuesday night, packed crowd, and I came on in like the 50th minute, which was my longest appearance in the Premier League, and we were 1-0 down, and within about 15 minutes we had gone 1-1, 2-1, 3-1. And I remember celebrating in the crowd, basically with the QPR fans away from home, thinking, and I remember it because it was like so stupid. I was thinking, this is it. This is it. I'm here. I'm playing. We've just turned the result round. I know what the press is like as well. A young player comes on, 1-0 down, 3-1. This is it.
Yeah.
And in the 90th minute, I broke my foot. Yeah, so getting a tackle against Joe Cole, and I left the stadium on crutches, and I just, at that moment, I was just like, you idiot. You idiot.
Can I ask, one thing I'm always fascinated by, you said about kind of Villa Park Tuesday night. What happens on the bus there and back? Is it lots of chat? Is it lots of silence and headphones in? Lots of snacking? What does that look like? What does that look? You never know. What does that look like on the way there and on the way back?
Well, for me, obviously, it was a completely different experience to everyone else on the bus, because I was like, doing everything for the first time. So it was, quite a lot of nerves, and but generally the bus is. I think a lot of people have this illusion that that footballers are somewhat different, and they are very simple beasts, very simple human beings in a great way. It's just chat about what's going on, maybe a few card games, the football will be on, we'll always have the game that's live, and it's quite a sort of a jovial, relaxed atmosphere, because it's a job in it, as much as it's not. Yeah. It is.
Do you feel the pressure or not? Like when you're going to a big game, do you sense the nerves in each other?
So in that game,
yeah,
and I remember it so clearly because I was young and obviously recognised the opportunity, and I've never felt this at any other footballing experience. I was shaking on the sideline as I was ready to come on, like shaking. I don't know if you've ever experienced like nerves in that way where you're actual having a physical, like such a visceral physical reaction, but I remember like shaking on the sideline in anticipation, hearing the noise, hearing the adrenaline, and then when I came on, I made my first pass, I settled, but I was absolutely like terrified, but in the best possible way.
Does the manager put an arm around? I mean, he must understand the size of what you're just about to achieve.
Well, in many ways, I think it shows when you're a young player and a manager says to you at 50 minutes, we're 1-0 down, I'm going to bring you on. It shows an like implicit trust, because his job's on the line. The club is in the relegation zone, and it's a huge decision. So I think they just are in the. If a manager puts you in that situation, like similar in business, when your chips are really down and you choose somebody, that's a huge deal of faith and courage, actually. Shame I couldn't, replicate that same courage. But I actually love that feeling of such almost fear in a way.
But But it's interesting because that is one of your career highs,
Yeah.
and the memories that you have and that celebration. To then have it end with a broken foot, that must have been really tough to manage. Or was it easier because you had the high and therefore you had something to get back to that you really believed you could achieve?
I think it was a snapshot of 10 years in football, isolated in 30, 40 minutes. That is the nature of the beast. Is like 1 minute you're on the floor, next minute you're elated, and whatever level that is, whatever your remuneration is, every player can resonate with the emotional turbulence of being a professional footballer. To a certain degree, you just become better at dealing with it. I don't think you ever become immune to it because it feels very intense. And now I sit away from it and it's like, how could I ever have been that intense about things? Like it surely wasn't that big of a deal. But at the time, it feels so intense because I think you've got the emotion of the sport, you've got the adrenaline that's happening within you chemically, and then you've just got a group of relatively emotionally sort of challenged people who have been institutionalized for 15 years and that sort of equates to.
Well, it's funny you say that because I was speaking to a friend of mine in football the other day and he said, well, that's why, we get married so young. It's because it gives us that partner to shore up our emotional challenges when actually, we may be away from our parents or, we're actually older and need to move away from our parents. But like, were you alone all this time? Did you have someone to lean on in the ups and downs when you come back with a broken foot? Did you have someone to lean on?
So I got married at 26, and I actually did an interview recently with a friend of mine who used to play, and he said, I ask a lot of the footballers this, he said, does your partner ever say you're emotionally unavailable? And all of them go, yeah, basically. I know it's slightly tongue-in-cheek that, because I think, we're not all, emotionally unavailable, but you build up this kind of tolerance for pain, basically. And I, to answer your question, I think I started dating my girlfriend just probably after that broken foot, and there was perhaps a correlation between that. But I think, some of the best footballers understand the importance of having a grounded family life around you, and that's super important.
Yeah, you're a young footballer coming through, and you're finding your feet. You get a bit of a taste of Premier League football. You then go through a loan system, right, which I'd imagine takes you to all corners of the country for relatively short periods of time. How do you manage that in the context of the relationships you can build, I guess, the support that you may need, and your ability to keep performing at a top level while having to deal with all this change off the pitch?
Sorry, are you just sent somewhere? Like, do you have a say, like, just in terms of the structure of loans? Do loan offers come in and you go, oh, I like that one, I like that one? Are you just sent somewhere randomly? How does the process work for you?
So it depends on how coveted you are. I remember a few of my loan moves came about because I was coveted, and a few of them I really manufactured because I was desperate to go and play football. So
yeah,
which ones were coveted and which ones were you desperate to go and play football?
So I did, a couple of my early loans where you're sort of untested, like Stevenage and stuff like that, where I was like 19 but came from a bigger club and had done well. There's no real body of work to compare me to, so you just sort of, I think you can live off the kudos of being, at a Premier League or Championship club, and therefore they think that you can add value. And then as I went through a bit of a sticky patch where some of those loan moves didn't go well, and if you don't do well when you go down for a number of variables, whether it's you or the club doesn't work out or the environment, I remember Swindon, which was my most successful loan, I manufactured entirely. So
when you say you manufactured it, what do you mean?
Well, I was training with the first team at QPR and I was part of the squad, but I wasn't going to play that season. Harry Redknapp said to me, you're not going to play, basically. And I had no offers to go on loan. So I sort of sat there in the dressing room being like, what am I going to do? Called my agent, being like, I need to get out, and how are we going to solve this? And it was sort of he did a lot of calling, and Bobby Zamora actually, brilliant, was amazing for me. He called up his friend who was the manager of Swindon in League One, where I shouldn't, like, it sounds not a great level, but League One, if I'm in the Championship and I didn't do well at a club in League Two, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Kind of, he called up his mate who was the manager of Swindon and said, this boy's got a lot of talent, he'll fit the way you play, and he's a great character.
What do you say to Harry when he says you're not going to be in the team?
Yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, basically. No, I mean, I was a unique character, and I think it went against me in many respects because of my education and because of, well, my character, that I was always very forthright with my opinions. And when you don't have a backdrop of a long career, that was probably not a smart move. But I was always taught to, my dad in particular, coming back to like this feeling of not belonging, was always on at me saying, you know what, you're coming from this background of having a private school education into the lion's den of people from, real challenging backgrounds. And, if you don't give as good as you get, you're going to be taken advantage of. So I over-indexed for giving as good as I got. I would, really take my opinions to people. And I'd always I'd learned to do that in a better way as I got older and in a more kind of collaborative way. But I was difficult. I was difficult. And, but I was really talented. I didn't get into a Premier League squad because I didn't have the talent. But I could have managed up so much better.
Can I ask, how much were you being paid when Harry told you, what?
So I was reflecting on this the other day. I was like, my first contract was 300 quid a week. I then went to 1,000 a week. And then my kind of third one at QPR was, I think, about 3,500 a week. So that was when I broke through to the first team. So not comparative to where football is today, it wasn't a lot. But, as a 19-year-old, it's quite a lot of money. We by the way, football deals in weeks.
Yeah,
we don't deal in per annum now, like in the working world. We couldn't even total that up to the per annum. It's bizarre, isn't it?
It's always the strange one. You go, what other industry breaks something down weekly? We asked Jamie.
I can actually tell you it's egregiously expensive rental property because it looks much better if it's like 12. And you're like, oh, okay.
But I think it is. It's obviously a really difficult thing then for you to manage because you're suddenly getting access to a lot of money and you don't necessarily know how to manage it and what to do with it.
Yeah, you get a car. So that's, you make all the same mistakes and you try and fit in. And
what are the mistakes that people make when they get that cash injection?
Well, I think the overinvestment in pretty illiquid and devaluing assets, basically.
So it's cars, it's
cars,
watches,
clothes, pretty much anything kind of consumerist that you can think of that doesn't hold its value, apart from maybe like the watches.
But people buying the Pateks are actually laughing.
Yeah, they're laughing. Yeah. But I wasn't doing that at that stage. I was bought an Audi A3 and thought I was wicked and really cool.
You probably wanted to come into that car park.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's a certain rite of passage, and there's a certain. I think the deepest, and it's a bit sad, but it's just you just don't know yourself. You don't have the confidence to be like, this is who I am, and take it or leave it. And especially with me feeling like I was kind of on the outside of all these worlds, I just didn't know who I was.
Can I ask a super personal question? When did your father die? How old were you?
Yeah, so when I was 19, so that was a huge variable.
And that was at the point of you transitioning into the £1,000 a week. Where was that in your kind of professional career?
Yeah, so it was pretty much as I was breaking into the QPR first team. So I was going away for my first pre-season tour with them just before that, and I had been on one loan move, and then we were coming back up to pre-season, and he passed away. And I think I was thinking of how to answer your loan question. My dad dying was obviously tragic and difficult, but I very much had a codependent relationship with him. He was my world, I guess. And he was living, I think, vicariously through my private education because he was from a very sort of tough working class background. So the idea of me going to private school was just unbelievable to him. So he was, I think that was one part of it. And then the second thing, the idea of me being a professional footballer was enormous for him, as it was for me. But we were sort of in cahoots, basically. And he was my agent. And anytime anything happened to football, I give him a call. And anytime it was a contract, I give him a call. And I didn't really do anything without giving him a call. And when he passed away, it felt like, absolute rug pulled from underneath me. But I learned a lot, and I started to develop this sense of self, I think.
Can I ask, what did you learn when you reflect on that?
So I learned about business a lot because I got exposed to his sort of world. And, you know, you don't plan your death at 54. So there wasn't a huge succession plan. So I had to sort of get thrown in the deep end to sort of help my family. So I remember there was two things. Well, one thing he said to me, which he had a lot of these sort of sayings, but the one that stuck out the most was, the best education, bar the education you're getting, is to read the newspaper every day. And he always used to go on about that. And he, you know, anyway, so I started to read like the FT, like cover to cover, like pretty much every day. And it was arduous. I was not reading it out of enjoyment. I was just reading it. Now I read it out of pleasure. I love it. I love like business, but I was reading it and Googling EBITDA, profit, loss.
I wish some of our founders would.
And I was just like on this Google Drive, like Googling all of these things and reading. And that was great for me because I got context.
Yeah.
I got context. So that was one aspect. The other aspect was to just kind of critical think. You know, I think when you are codependent on something, you might think you're coming to the solution yourself, but invariably you're not, and then you are somewhat protected, whether you realize consciously or subconsciously, from the downside of that decision, because you're like, oh, somebody else has made that for me, so great, I don't have to think about it. Whereas when you have to really think about it.
Yeah. So he was so much part of your professional life up to that stage, and then obviously to have that at 19, did that ever make you call into question football? Did it make you more committed to try and succeed, and knowing that he obviously had that vicarious life through you? I'm interested to just understand how you actually approached that when it came down to how you move forward.
I think it made me more determined. I think it was a distraction as well in many regards, because a singular focus is important, and being pulled into different directions with certain aspects of my life was not ideal. But in the end, I think it probably allowed me to earn a living and a career from it, and gave me a better probability of doing that because of it, because I had suddenly had the comfort of my dad not being there, and I'd always had, I think, a certain level of stubbornness, let's say, and a decent work ethic comparative to the normal person. But I think what it did is it just said, you know, fuck me, Mike, you've got to do this now.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got like a relatively successful parent, your identity can be wrapped up a little bit in that. And when that's gone, you're either like, cool, or you're like, you know, this is what it takes to be successful.
Because he was I think just to add a bit of context, because people may not know, he was obviously a huge part of a huge footballing community. Yeah. Do you want to just give a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, so we grew up supporting Nottingham Forest. He was the owner of Nottingham Forest for 12 years. We travelled home and away pretty much to every game, you know, for 12 years. And I think learned the hard way that football ownership is not sometimes the best kind of economic decision.
Yeah.
But it was our lifeblood. It was part of my family. And obviously that travelled around with me with regards to football a lot.
You say about football ownership not being the best economic decision. We were talking before about some clubs being kind of reasonably efficient buyers financially, and how they've, you know, accumulated great wealth for a lot of people. Like, what was the why is it a poor decision? Has it changed? Is it actually now a great investment to own clubs, do you think? I'm just intrigued.
So if you look at like revenue and like EBIT of a football club, like it doesn't make sense really with regards to other businesses. Like the profitability of a football club based on its revenues isn't very high. The margins aren't great because the player costs are ludicrous. Yeah. Like obviously the higher up you go and the more commercial the club proposition is, that improves. But like even you look at some of these sales that are happening now, it's like, what is it, like 8-9 times revenue? Yeah. I mean, even in like the tech world, you'd be like 8-9 times revenue. That's punchy. So if you're working on like a kind of a cash flow valuation, it's going to take you a long time to like get that money back. Mm-hmm. But the enterprise value is what people betting on, right? So, you know, over a period of 5-10 years, is the enterprise value of that asset going to be greater than where it was 5-10 years ago? Because you like yeah, you can improve the profitability, but there's a finite amount of clubs, right? But just to answer your question fully, is like that only applies to a very small segment of football. You've got like 20 clubs essentially in the Premier League, of which 10 of them, maybe 12 of them every year could be relegated. Even Leicester won the league and now suddenly they're looking like they could be relegated.
Do you think that is because actually they are not structured optimally to generate free cash flow? And I sound like a real kind of PE guy, like, you know, looking at football assets. But like when you look at, you know, Ryan Reynolds and what he's built in terms of media assets around Wrexham and what he can do to leverage and monetize the distribution that he's building on the back of that, that can be free cash flow machines. Like, do you think sports teams are optimally structured to be free cash flow machines?
I think systemically, football is not optimized to generate free cash flow unless you're Ryan Reynolds, who is a Hollywood star who can attract media attention, because the wage relative to the revenue of the players is way too high, which is driven by like Man City, right? Because even like when I was in my final year of contract at Swindon, I was on like 120 base, right? And our playing squad...
120 base a year.
Yeah. And then our playing squad was probably like, you know, anywhere from 2 to 2.5 million salary, total salary. Like the whole playing squad was 2.5 million, let's say, and the revenue of the club was like 5 million. So if like 50% of your revenue is on your like only your playing squad, and forget about all the other operating costs, you know, it's pretty tough to turn a profit. You know, you don't have, you don't have to be a genius to work that out. But because of the carrot of enterprise value, basically driven by the Premier League, you know, where you can be like a Bournemouth and buy it for nothing and suddenly be worth hundreds of millions, that's what the game everyone is playing. But the risk to reward on that is enormous because you've got to pump a lot of cash to try and get the enterprise value.
Yep. Do you think we're going to see a generation of American, more distribution-focused investors, likely celebrities, come in and do a Ryan Reynolds take 2, take 3, take 4, realizing that you can turn a Wrexham into a multi-$100 million company? And actually, we're going to see a generation of the lower level clubs getting bought and turned into these media franchises.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think what they've shown, which I think is brilliant, is there is more commerciality and interest that we can drive in the product. It's exciting, right? No matter where you're from, you can get excited about Wrexham because of what they've done. They've made it super accessible. I think the era of players being super protected, and you know, I think we'll start to unravel more and more. I think you'll start to see referees getting interviewed. I think you'll start to see, like, you know, the Amazon documentaries being a staple for every single club, because they have to. Because if you're paying $5 billion or whatever, you know, the way to generate more revenue is through the commercials.
Should we have a look at I guess that stage then, moving on? And you mentioned your last year of contract at Swindon, but post your loan there, you then moved permanently. And that was, am I right in saying that was under the club post QPR that you then went to permanently?
Yeah.
What was the role of that? Because it was also the one that I think was your final club, right? So how did that change when you actually got that home? You settled there for a few years. How did that allow you to kind of build, I guess, the next phase of your career with a little bit more structure than what you'd had previously?
I think that was where I learned about passion that I spoke about truly. Prior to that, football to me was an identity thing. It was QPR, I was this QPR player, and that's who I was. And it was Cool Down the Nightclub. And really, you know, I was, you know, I was so like obsessed by this idea of me being a Premier League footballer. And I don't think the foundations of it were actually correct. I think it was more for the status of being a Premier League footballer and feeling like I was worthy than it was because I was desperately passionate about being a Premier League footballer. And that like, there is a nuance there which I felt. And when I went to Swindon, I removed myself from this idea that I was a Premier League footballer, and I just was like, I'm going to enjoy football and play to the best of my ability. And I had the happiest time and arguably played my best football, albeit at a lower level, because I had that focus. And that's one of the things that I've taken from football now is if you build a foundation of ego and your identity being wrapped up in something, you won't actually achieve where you want to go, because inevitably that will either lead to poor decision making, or you won't have the right I guess strength of character to deal with things when they come along their way, and you won't sort of fulfill, I guess, the true potential that you have.
Is it a hit to ego? I often see, like, you know, in transfer markets, player moves from Premier League club to League One, and I think, like, oh, that must be a hit to their ego. Is it a hit to ego for players when they move down leagues and play for fantastic but just lower level clubs?
I will answer your question, but can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If 20VC
Yeah.
was the 100th most popular podcast,
Yeah.
and not, you know, the phenomenal numbers that you're doing, I'm sure that's still phenomenal, by the way. How would you process that?
I adore what I do.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, like, I've always said I would do this without any money attached.
Yeah,
Because I love
yeah,
this.
yeah,
So honestly, yeah, I mean, it'd be annoying, and I'd be annoyed.
yeah,
But also, it's just an opportunity. Like, that is my fault.
yeah,
That's a reflection on me, and I can get it to number one.
yeah,
So I need to do something different.
yeah.
That's how I would.
Is that similar?
So I think certainly when I got to the latter half of my career, I would have taken that answer. Probably in the first part of my career, I was wrapped up in my ego and my identity of this, and it was a hit to my ego.
Yeah.
I would like dread the question of people asking you, like, what do you do? And I was a professional footballer, which to most people would be like badge of honor.
Answer.
Yeah, a pretty cool answer. Whereas for me, I'd be like, no, don't ask me what I do, please. Because
Why was that? What was it?
it was my ego, clearly. It was this identity of me being a Premier League footballer, or not even a properly Premier League footballer, but this young kid who played for QPR. For me, that was success, because my frame of reference for success as well growing up was my dad, who was this, you know, really successful businessman. So for me, it was like, if I'm not Messi or Ronaldo, then it's not success.
Yeah.
And then what I didn't understand was the passion that you just spoken about is the foundation to ultimately get to that level of success. And without that, you're never going to get there. So I'm so pleased that that happened to me.
So then when you're at Swindon, it seems like, you know, that kind of maturity starts to set in, and you become comfortable more with where you're at now, and happy playing your football because you're playing week in, week out, and you're doing really well. Was that also the moment maybe where there were other things that started coming into your life where you were giving more time to business thoughts or family?
For sure, I was definitely, just to come back, I was comfortable with who I was, not where I was. And I think that was very different for me. And because of that, I started to embrace my background rather than, you know, I've always had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, and I probably still do now, if I'm being like sort of properly self-reflective. But I started to manifest that in a positive way, where it'd be like, you know, where there'd be a few quips in the dressing room, I would embrace that and make everyone laugh and really be that person and character that, you know, was a leader, I guess, in that sense, rather than somebody who was a bit spiky and difficult. And because of that, I then realised, actually, I've got, you know, I have interests, and that's cool, and I should embrace who I am and that backstory. And I do have, I think, a perspective on the world, and how does that manifest away from football? And then I started to explore these ideas, and then, you know, Hylo obviously came about. And
So how did the end of football come about for you?
so it was COVID in 2019. I don't know if you're aware.
Listen, I was podcast.
You never left the house anyway.
And we were essentially, like, not ironic, I guess is the right word, but we were normal for footballers. We were at home. We weren't traveling. We weren't training. We had, you know, we could get up in the morning and do relatively what we liked. We had a small training program, but no one knew when it was coming back. And for 6 months, I was essentially at home, which I'd never ever done in my life. And prior to that, we'd already had this idea, my co-founder and I, about kind of building a brand and I guess products that were slightly different. And that 6 months allowed me to really focus on this idea, and it was an outlet for me. And then we managed to build a lot of momentum in 6 months because of passion and excitement. And actually, we got a lot done, just two of us, just every day.
You're very good at building in public. Sorry to interrupt you, but you know, like, I follow your story, and like, you very well documented the creation process of the company, the runs that you do, the passion that you have for running is so evident on every LinkedIn post, on everything that shows up. I think that you did very well.
Yeah. Well, I think I learned that, in a way, self-promotion is part of the job.
100%.
And like, if I'm going to personally develop myself, it might make me feel deeply uncomfortable, which it does, by the way. And a lot of people are like, you're really active on LinkedIn, but I learned it from you actually, pretty early on. You were like, content, you know, is iterative, and
it's a muscle. You had to learn.
And you got a muscle. Exactly, that was your post. And I just was like, I think I'm doing everything I can, but I'm being a bit like coy about what we're creating, and I've got to be everywhere to everyone because I never know which one person that day on LinkedIn is going to resonate with my post. And since then, for example, like loads of leads, loads of stuff has happened for us. But yeah, to answer your question, I had my daughter on the same day as the soft launch of Hylo, 29th of July. The next day, 30th, I went back to pre-season training where COVID was fully done. Exhausted. Ran the business for 2 months within pre-season training. We played Charlton September, I think it was 1st or 2nd, behind closed doors, empty stadium. I was awful. I couldn't, you know, I gave it away every single time. And I literally that night called up the chairman of the club and said, you know, that 3-year contract that I just signed, because the previous season I was our best player. You know, that 3-year contract that I've just signed, can I give it back? And we chatted for 3 hours, and he...
Why did you give it back? Because you didn't feel you could commit to the level of quality? You didn't want to? Why did you want to give it back?
Primarily, I think, because I didn't want to. But also I felt the club and myself, whilst I don't want to present it in a way that makes me sound more important than I am, but we had a really special relationship. Within like the 10-year career that I had, like 4 or 5 seasons I played for this club, and my stats, my consistency, my enjoyment was just amazing. And I didn't want to be half in, half out with a place that I had such great memories with and felt like I had received a lot back from. So I was the highest paid player of the club now. We just got promoted, and it felt like immoral to run these 2 horses. And also, like, you can't, you know what it's like in business. Like, you can't be half in as well.
But was that like a confidence then that you obviously had established to be able to make that decision and have the confidence that you were giving up the thing that you had worked your entire life for, with something then to move into? That must have been an amazing moment for you to actually realize this is what I want to do.
It was tough because it was the time where actually I was enjoying football the most, because I felt this sense of personality and acceptance for myself, and I was playing really well for me, for me, which was great. And I felt like this kind of confidence every time I went and played.
You felt Villa Park in the 50th minute again.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
El Clasico.
Without the shaking. And I felt great. But I felt I was operating in a ceiling, or with a ceiling, because I wasn't going to get back to the Premier League. And if I did, it would be it would be low, like very low probability.
Yeah.
I could maybe squeak the Championship again. And always in the back of my mind, coming back to this chip on my shoulder and this sort of identity thing, was my frame of reference was my dad. And the great thing about coming up in an entrepreneurial family, I guess, and having a mum and dad who both defied a lot of odds to achieve success in their own right, is like your capacity for potential is like really high, because you can, that's where your frame of reference is.
Yeah.
So for me, like it was like I feel like I can deliver something, for myself, for my family, and sounds a bit grandiose, so for the world or for people, that is truly impactful and truly, at a scale that's much bigger than, a League One footballer.
What were those traits that you think served you so well in those early days looking at business that you could attribute to having picked up through being part of a team sports or sporting environment in general?
So I think the capacity for resilience, and those words of choice, I think I was thinking about this the other day. I think everyone has like a innate kind of potential for resilience, or they have an innate understanding of what resilience feels like. But it's a muscle that I think you train over time, and both with good and bad. And resilience comes from understanding good times that are really good and understanding bad times that are really bad. Because if all you've ever done is go through bad times, then you're sort of a bit desperate, because you're not thinking about, you don't have the capacity to understand what a good time looks like. And if all you think about is good times, then you that's a fallacy. So I had been through this constant yo-yoing of up and down, which had built up a muscle of resilience, which I think is the foundation of any successful startup, because you're defying odds every single day. So for me, I still feel this today, is like, and sometimes I say it to my co-founder, but you're going to have to take me out. Like, it's my mentality. It's like, you'll have to take me out to get me away from this thing that we're doing, because this is, like, there is nothing that will happen to us that we won't solve.
It's interesting. We actually spoke to Jacob before.
Oh.
And the first thing he said when we talked about what made you world class, he said it was the intensity and the will to win.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I think it is that resilience muscle. I think you have to go through good and bad to realize neither is permanent, and neither is that desperate or great. And therefore, you just keep moving forward. And I think if you're trying to build something, big, you can't, one of our investors always says, like, you can't look out the window when, things are going well. Yeah. And you've got to look in the mirror when things aren't. So it's like,
I think the really hard thing is actually, and I'm sure you'll find this now, but it's like you attach your happiness to the development of the company. And when the company's going great and sales are great, you're like flying. And when it's in the dumpster, you're going to be in the dumpster. And the hardest thing, I think, as a founder is to detach your mood and happiness as a person from the progression of your company, because it's not always going to be the same.
Yeah, I agree with most of that statement. I do believe that if you're happy when things aren't going well, there's a problem.
Sure.
I think you need to detach yourself from the idea that this is the sole definition of your success. But like, I wasn't happy when we were getting beat at a weekend in football, and I'm still not happy when we have a bad day of sales. I understand there's processes and systems that I need to develop in order to improve that. And that's the key differentiator for me, is like, I don't think I can ever separate myself from outcomes, because I've just had 20 years of being like institutionalized around outcomes and winning. So it will always hurt when we have a bad day of sales. But the way that I resolve those things now is not petulant, which was me as an early 20-year-old being like, oh, I deserve to be playing, sometimes with Harry Redknapp. I deserve these things because this is who I am. It's like now it's like, right, cool, we had a really bad day. Why? Okay, is it an anomaly? Is it not? What are the processes that we have to implement to mean that we have better days?
How do you associate then that kind of outcomes and inputs piece? If the outcomes aren't working for you, are you looking at yourself to then put more into it to try and change that?
I think every outcome is somewhat predictable from the inputs, right? So yes, I care about outcomes, because if I don't sell over the next 6 to 12 months, my product or service or whoever it is, but in our case, our product, I'm not going to get to the next stage. So, but what I realize is that if I have a bad day of sales, today was actually not too bad, but if I had a bad day of sales today, separating myself from today's outcome to make sure that I can affect next month's outcome, because we're a trading business, so I might be able to affect a week. I might be able to do something to impact a week, but it's more likely that I can really make an impact on a month or 2 months. So for me, it's like, focus on the inputs, care about the outcomes because you have to, but focus on the inputs that are going to lead to tangible changes on the outcomes within a period of time that are relevant for you.
I'm going to ask, what's the single hardest element of scaling Hylo so far? What are you like, this is a nightmare?
Inventory.
Talk to me about that. What's so hard about inventory? Inventory management, inventory financing?
I think it's just the age-old demand supply sort of consumer goods thing, especially when you're trying to build an impact-driven business, because the speed that you can implement to help comes at sometimes the cost of the environment, like air freight versus sea freight. Those will expedite things. I think understanding what you want, what you're going to sell in a year's time. Like if I said to you, who's coming on in a year, or the podcast, you need to build a really solid plan for what your sales are going to be or what your viewership is going to be on this podcast with this person in a year's time. It becomes difficult.
It's impossible.
It's impossible. Yeah, and there is a level of impossibility within that in itself. So it's like, how do you get better at how do you get less wrong?
Can I stop? Because I think we've talked about it a little bit, but I just think it's really worth tapping into it. Like elevator pitch, Hylo. What are we talking about?
As a footballer, I felt very removed from the relationships I had with sports brands, but they were so important to all of us. What you wear on your chest, whether it's sports or not, is a representation of self. And in sports, that is more tribal. We are saying something about ourselves with everything that we wear. And not only is that sort of a personality thing, but it's also inherent to the enjoyment of the sport. Like a good product enhances your ability to do something. So me feeling removed from my relationship there, I started to question, and even more so when my co-founder Jacob called me up and said, like, what brands do I subscribe to? And he actually used those words, subscribe, which is very Jacob. And I'd been going through this process of becoming, I think, more vocal in sports around sustainability, more passionate in my life as a consumer about supporting brands and decisions that I was making. And then I'd go every day to put my kit on, and I'd completely switch off from I didn't even think about that relationship. And then when I had my eyes open to the fact that my biggest platform, even in my small world, is on a Saturday, what I wear and how I present myself to that audience that I'm performing in front of, and I don't feel that aligned to the products that I'm wearing. I'm like, how can I do that? And why? And then from there we were like, well, actually, is there are there products and a brand for like the modern day mainstream athlete who's not hiking and surfing, who already has a very close relationship with the environment, that connects them to nature? Because we play football every day outside. We play, Stamford Bridge, it might be in a city, but it's reliant on a healthy environment. So how do we connect athletes in that mainstream audience to environmentalism and to nature? And that is the premise of Hylo, is essentially, our mission statement is to protect the future of running and sport. So we exist to enhance people's experience of movement, but also to change the way products are made.
Harry's always been a huge advocate of it. It's something I've always found really interesting whenever we've talked about the success of his business and getting everyone to pull in the same direction and genuinely believe in what you're trying to build. So I think you'll love, you obviously have the run like the world depends on it as well. And I guess from your side, how important is it when you're trying to build this company, when you're trying to build a company in a space that has lots of competition, maybe not on sustainability front, but certainly from an athletics perspective and manufacturing perspective, how important is it to make these people convinced that you are the company that is actually going to go and achieve what you say you're going to do?
I think certainly in the early days, it's everything. If I was to sit, imagine you didn't know me, and imagine we didn't, you knew nothing about Hylo, and I'm like, I'm going to come in and we're going to build a sports brand and it's going to be bigger than Nike. You'd be like, yeah, cool, man. But like, that's what you do at the beginning. You're literally like, hey, I've got this idea and we're going to be a sports brand that's going to like revolutionize sport. And that's kind of what the early stages of a founder is like. It's like, I don't know how to make a product. Let alone do I know how to make a shoe. Don't know how to develop a brand. Don't know anything about marketing. Don't know anything about a balance sheet. Don't know anything about inventory. So that's all you have. So the essence of being a founder is the ability to kind of sell that vision. And then either you inherently believe it, or you just, you build up enough fortitude along the journey to believe it. Yeah. And now we have a business and we have products and I understand it a lot more, but you're constantly evolving that. And even when you get to a certain stake in the ground, you're like, right, okay, this is cool. But who are the people that are going to deliver us to the next step? Yeah. And what does that vision look like? And yeah, you've got to constantly be selling.
Yeah. For a reference point, I guess you obviously want to be authentic. Is it more Nike, Adidas, Puma type ambition? Is it actually sticking more specifically towards an athletics piece and looking at shoes in particular? So, we were talking about On or something similar. How do you look at the future for the business? Do you actually worry about it now? Is it something that develops? Where are the areas that Hylo is actually going to play in your mind?
I probably worry about it every single day in some form, shape or another, in the sense that it means everything to me. I feel very invested in a good way. I believe strongly that we are a shoe brand, first and foremost. If you look at the history of sportswear brands and the difficulty of making shoes, that's a space you want to be in to build, true impact, first of all. Like, shoes need to be disrupted in the way that they are. And if you don't have a real core purpose and it's linked to tangible improvement, then why do you exist? But I also think from a sort of a moat point of view, you want to be in shoes. I was chatting to somebody today about it. Over 5-10 years, if you believe in science, which most logical people do, it's like how does that manifest itself to all industry in the context of climate change? And I'm deeply passionate about nature and the environment, so that's where I derive my passion from.
Where did that come from?
I think you should take a stronger stance, by the way. Sorry, I'm interrupting you totally and just hijacking that with a rebel idea. But like, I think you need to create like an army, by the way. And the easiest armies to create are armies that are anti something. And it's like Nike ships billions and billions of products around the world in the most non-climate change friendly way with the most non-climate change friendly products. Like, we are the fuck you to that. Like, you are for us or you're against us. I like the run like the world depends on us. It's like follow the movement, but it needs more emotion. Do you see what I mean? And you need enemies are great people to rally against. It makes the collective stronger.
I mean, you're preaching to the converted. I think we're on that journey at the moment. And I think it's having confidence in where you are as a company in order to deliver that,
So like Oxford Street, Nike store. Here's an idea, free idea. I want a massive billboard that says, fly with Hylo because Nike fly everywhere else.
Yeah.
Don't kill the environment.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I believe there is definitely
that was a terrible idea.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
No, I get what you're saying, and it is a very clear positioning.
Yeah.
And it does build that tribalism that I think you're referring to. I think there is a balance of where you want to be in a year or two and how cheap you want your marketing to be and where you want to be over 20 years. And I think some things you can't unsay.
Yeah.
And I do believe we should be more kind of more of a protagonist. No, I think we should be more of a protagonist because I think we stand on with real great intention and integrity. And I think if you're doing anything from that space, then that's a really positive place to be. But I also think, for cheap clicks, trying to just like bash somebody else over 20 years, I think is a losing strategy because integrity is what matters in sustainability, particularly today, because there is so much nonsense and so many people just trying to tag along to try and sort of turn around their performance in 6 months, and that's where they think the zeitgeist is. But for me, I want to build the biggest sportswear brand there is, and I want to drive as much impact as possible, and that can only be built from a place of integrity. So we can have more protagonism from that integrity, but just doing it to get through the next year, I'm conscious of.
From a place of naivety, how much can you obviously still ensure the supply chains are the same, the quality of the products are the same, and therefore then the difference that you can impact on the process when you produce, let's say, some shoes compared to what Nike do? Are they 50% more sustainable? Like,
yeah.
How do you actually still do it while ensuring all of then the qualities and the processes meet your demand and meet the quality assurances?
Yeah, I mean, the question's bang on. Sustainability is very subjective at the moment. So we talk a lot more at Hylo about impact because it starts to objectify the discussion just by the nature of that vernacular. So what we try and do is understand our impact and then give context against the peer group, essentially, to really understand, are we doing things better? Having a holistic impact strategy is looking at everything, but then you've got to allocate resources as a startup against the most effective things within and outside of your control. So ideally you look at everything, but you then give a hierarchy of importance and give some sort of financial quota against that. Our two main things we are, I guess, weighted against more is beginning and end of life. So we do auditing of our supply chain. We do LCAs around emissions and stuff like that, and that all builds that picture and is super important. But you've got to focus, right? As a startup, you can't just apply your energy everywhere with finite amount of resource. So beginning of life, essentially, is the major issue in our industry, whereby pretty much all products are made by fossil fuel derived materials, so polyester, nylon. If you read the IPCC report, which I'm sure you guys have done,
obviously,
fossil fuels, number one cause of the climate crisis, the biggest thing we need to address moving forward. So for us, how we come up with our impact strategies, we look at like what is like the government, interpanel government talking about around climate change, right? It's renewables. So within our products, we try and replace fossil fuel derived materials with renewable materials. It's not a silver bullet. You still need to manage performance. You still need to compete on performance. So renewables for us is our focus. The shoe that I'm wearing this evening is about 64% renewable. So the ultimate vision is to go to 100%. The end of life issue is also the problem we're trying to solve for, or sort of that life cycle post-purchase. So shoes have a very short life cycle in comparison to other products, because if you run a lot, there's a compromise on performance over a period of time and issues happen. So kind of the most sustainable thing you can do, if you use that term, is to consume less and wear for longer. So we have essentially invested in kind of a service platform available for our product, where you get repair and recycling services accessible through your phone via NFC technology. So you don't need an app, you just tap your product and you can have a repair done via a local maker. You can get the product recycled via us at end of life, so we take it back. And we're looking to kind of scale that services angle of the business alongside sort of, I guess, the hardware side of the business in tandem, because again, it links back to the problem, which is shoes end up in landfill. 90% of shoes end up in landfill, short life cycle, and we need to sort of be focused around solving for the biggest problems rather than solving for every problem.
Can I ask you a question? And the final one from me. You run a lot, like a lot. You remind me of Forrest Gump.
I'll take that.
Yeah, it is. I love Forrest Gump. What do you say when it's really hard and you're just at that stage where I can't do another step? I can't do. What is your mind talk when it's like, I have to stop now?
So I've got two different variables of that. Like, there's not always the same. One is almost this place where I go, which is, if I don't continue, like, what does that look like? And sort of almost like a fear mindset of like, I can't fail here, because where do I go? Like, what do I do? Like, and I sort of, running relates to me to life in that regard, where I'm like, I did some ultra marathons last year, and I remember there was quite a lot of times in that where I'm like, right, if I don't complete this K, then Hylo's going to be on, or simple stuff. They sound silly, but it's like the things that I'm super passionate about. Sometimes for me, the fear of losing them gives me some momentum. I think the most scalable place, which I try and get to more, is kind of, this is a privilege to do what I'm doing. And that's when when I'm running, I run now so much. I didn't used to be a runner. Running was a punishment for me at football. My relationship with running was awful. I used to think, God, I don't want to run. Whereas running for me now is like the way I access normality, where I sort of like can be compassionate, where I can be level, make good decisions, and that's not hard. And it's a very cheesy, but a quote that I really love, like, for that basketball player who's like, pressure's a privilege. And it's just like, a lot of the time, founders or people starting stuff can, like, I don't think it's in a bad way, but I can do it. It's like, I can feel a bit self-indulgent. I'm working so hard. I'm brilliant. How hard is all of this? It's, I'm such a hard worker. And what really is happening there is you're sort of forgetting that you decided to do these things and that you wanted to do them, and you're almost being petulant in that conversation with yourself, where you're like, and it's sometimes I just slap myself and I'm like, you're creating something in the world that is allowing people to move and, having an impact, and you decided to do this, you idiot, get off your own, high horse or stop believing your own bullshit and just, embrace it. And that's when I'm fully activated.
It kind of leads into, I think, something that brings all this together. What in your mind is the role then of athletes in society today?
I think the context of the athlete has shifted, and I think part of that to do is to do with the commerciality around the whole game. It's just you're now being asked to perform on Amazon and Netflix, let alone on a Friday night game.
And you're being asked to perform 24 hours a day on Instagram and Instagram Reels and then YouTube Shorts and then TikTok.
Exactly.
And each person is a business.
Exactly. And the pay that these guys are getting comparative to even when I was properly playing 10 years ago is just kicked on. So I think that context has shifted, and therefore the downside of that is the scrutiny and the negativity. The upside of that is obviously financial, but their ability to have a voice in society. And I think you've seen that with Marcus Rashford. You've seen that with other, great sporting stars like Megan Rapinoe, who have genuinely changed the course of, government policy, of conversation, because of the power and influence that they wield. And I'm for that, because I think sport is a microcosm for most things in society. It's just like glorified and on TV, but there's a lot of sport that I look at and I just feel like I'm playing sport now. I'm like, I run a startup, but I'm playing sport just as a different, different. I haven't got my boots on, my laptop is my.
I'm wielding my Google.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's a sport, right? And you need the same. You need the same skills in many respects. And I think if athletes start to take that and get educated about it and be really informed and think about their legacy, not just as a successful player who earned lots of money, but what was their, like, if I was Marcus Rashford, I would feel like wicked. Not only that I'm super rich, which he is, and scoring loads of goals, but he's like changed like millions of kids' lives. Like, that is wicked. Like, and if you can do both, then like, why wouldn't you? That's like a pretty easy decision for me. Like I can't wield that influence because I'm not as good as Marcus Rashford. But like, if you could, it's just like, why wouldn't you? If there doesn't really, for me, seem to be a downside in that.
We're going to do a quick fire round. I'm going to say a short statement. You're going to say a short statement. You're going to have 60 seconds.
Great.
All right. Okay. Best stadium you played at?
St James's Park.
Why?
This is a cauldron, and I didn't play at many great stadiums.
Villa Park as well, obviously.
Yeah.
Pre-match or run meal?
Ooh.
Changed a lot, but probably the one I would go to would be tomato pasta. Very boring.
How long before? Night before? A couple of hours?
It depends, because like
I do long runs now, and I'm never sure what to have before or not.
Yeah, I think 3 hours. Yeah,
3 hours before. Do you drink much because then you need to pee? The
key to running is the hydration 24 hours before. Everyone thinks, I need to be hydrated an hour before, but if you hydrate 24 hours before, especially before a long run, that's what will make the most impact performance.
If I offered you 400 million for Hylo today, would you sell it?
No.
800?
No.
We're going to play this game.
Until he says yes.
I wouldn't. No. There's the financial piece, which is, I think you'd be undervaluing our potential. But I also believe that it's the journey and the process that, what else am I going to fucking do? I'm deeply unemployable.
You know the way you know the answer to the question of a sale is when you say, what would I do if I didn't have it? And if you said to me now, start another training company, I'd say don't fucking sell.
Yeah.
But if you say, hey, I'll go and do surfing in Hawaii, sell. But if I would do the exact same thing, I've had offers for 20 VC and I'm like, start another VC media company. And don't sell this one. It's always the best way to test it.
Yeah.
Dream brand ambassador, Hylo.
Lewis Hamilton. Lewis, if you're listening, come on.
Why Lewis?
Doesn't show his shoes much.
Well, I think there'll be like a point in time where he doesn't drive. I just think like the On model where they got a Federer who Swiss athlete, Swiss brand, escape velocity athlete in terms of his reach and pull to the world. It sort of transcends anything of sport, if that makes sense. It's like Federer wasn't wearing on in the first, when he was playing.
Yeah.
It was all about Federer, and like you need a certain type of athlete who transcends sport, who gets the context of the brand. And Lewis is very, very vocal around sustainability. He's, the best, really, unequivocally the best, and he's a British athlete.
Did you speak to him about investing?
We're talking very slowly to people around him, but you've got to be ready for it as well. Like when those moments come, if you're not set up, it can almost do quite a lot of damage. It sounds crazy, but you've got to have the troops ready.
Who's your business idol?
Yeah, my dad, I guess. Yeah, working class guy, age 15. Left school or didn't really have an opportunity to stay at school. Proper rags to riches, 20 quid in his pocket in London, did some banking exams, outlier intelligence, and did like one of the best in the country and went from there basically. And I think whilst I obviously have an idealistic view of him, I'm sure maybe others who knew him better would potentially disagree maybe, but I do believe he had integrity at his core, and whilst wanted to win, would never do that at the cost of people or so I think that's important to me.
Amazing. And finally, one piece of advice you give to athletes looking to get into business?
Slightly tongue-in-cheek, but don't read business books. I mean,
listen to VC
podcasts, but I do believe that
you didn't read Shoe Dog.
What I mean by that is like there's a lot of like acronyms out there and people who try and overcomplicate the basic essence of what a business is, and you can go into that feeling quite overwhelmed. And actually, certainly in the certainly I think through all of my career so far, it's just like I don't know the answer to this. I need to find like what is the logical approach to finding the answer, and that is just like following that train of thought. It's like I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. What's the most logical way of me finding out that answer has led us to have a business. It wasn't like at the beginning, how do we build a business with lots of EBITDA? Now it's obviously you start to think about that, but to get going, you just need to one step in front of the other and follow logic. And I think a lot of people can overestimate kind of giving too much information. So yeah.
I always think people fail in business for two reasons. Number one is they don't start, and number two is they stop. Follow two rules above, you can succeed. Exactly.
And I do believe that like the fundamentals of good business is like, do you have a product or service that people want? Do you have enough margin and do you have enough cash?
Margin matters.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for all your support. This has been fantastic, and I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.